This is a story about the ordinary lives and quiet connections of the people of Pompeii in the summer before the world remembered their city forever. There is a street in the south of Italy, nestled between the mountains and the sea, where the stones have been worn smooth by 10,000 footsteps a day. It is a street called the Via dell'Abbondanza, the Street of Abundance, and if you were to walk it today, you would find it silent, open to the sky, its buildings standing like the pages of a book left open to the weather. But once, not so very long ago in the long memory of the world, this street was alive. Let us visit it now. Let us go back, not to the moment the world remembers, not to the fire and the ash, but to the months before, to a summer, to a city that did not know it was living its last season, and so lived it fully, the way all of us live when we believe tomorrow is certain. It is late June, in the year we now call 79 AD, and the city of Pompeii is waking up. The sky is still dark, but only just. There is a band of deep blue along the eastern horizon, behind the mountain, and the air carries that particular coolness that belongs only to the hour before dawn, the coolness that the stones have been holding all night and are just beginning to release. Somewhere to the south, beyond the city walls, the sea is a sound more than a sight, a slow and patient breathing. The smell of bread has already begun. It drifts from the bakeries on the side streets, the pistrina, where the great stone mills have been turning since the fourth watch of the night, grinding grain into flour by the labor of donkeys walking their endless circles. The bread of Pompeii is round and scored into 8 wedges, and it is baking now in domed ovens whose heat has not gone out in years. On the Via dell'Abbondanza, a woman named Lucia is already awake. She moves through the front room of her thermopolium, her food counter, her livelihood, her inheritance, with the sureness of someone who has performed these motions so many times they have become a kind of breathing. She kneels before the small brick hearth set into the floor behind the L-shaped counter and coaxes the embers from last night back to life, feeding them dried olive wood until a flame catches. The warmth reaches her face. She sets a pot of water over the heat and begins preparing the lentils, sorting them by touch in the low light, picking out the small stones, rinsing them in a clay bowl. The Thermopolium is a modest place, as these establishments go. There are perhaps 80 of them in Pompeii, hot food counters where working people come to eat because their own small apartments have no kitchens, or because the food here is better than what they might manage alone. Lucia's counter is made of brick, faced with fragments of colored marble, not expensive marble, but arranged with care. A pattern of terracotta and cream and the occasional chip of green. Set into the countertop are the dolia, the deep clay jars where she keeps the day's food warm, lentils with cumin and coriander in one, a stew of chickpeas and onion in another, sometimes fish in garum, the fermented fish sauce that is to Roman cooking what salt is to bread, present in nearly everything. On the wall behind the counter, faded but still visible, someone once painted a small figure of Mercury, the god of commerce, winged sandals and all. Lucia's husband commissioned that painting in the first year of their marriage. He has been gone for 7 years now, a fever one winter that did not break, and the painting remains, a quiet guardian over every transaction. She does not think of this every morning. Some mornings she does. This morning her hands are busy and her mind is on the day ahead. There is a jar of chickpeas that needs soaking. The vinegar is low. She will need to speak to the woman who sells cheese near the Forum about a delivery. These are the thoughts that carry her through the early hours, the small practical concerns that are, in their own way, a kind of comfort. A life made of solvable problems is a life that keeps moving forward. Above her, up a narrow wooden staircase, her daughter Petronia is still asleep. Petronia is 15, an age that in Pompeii is no longer quite childhood, though it is not yet fully anything else. In a few years, perhaps sooner, there will be conversations about marriage, about the future, about what kind of life Petronia will lead. But for now, in this last hour before dawn, she sleeps, and Lucia lets her sleep, and the Thermopolium fills slowly with the smell of lentils and wood smoke and the first pale light of a summer morning. Outside, the city is stirring. A cart rumbles over the stone ruts in the street, deep grooves worn by years of iron-rimmed wheels. A dog barks once, then quiets. Somewhere a shutter opens. The stepping stones that cross the street at intervals, raised blocks that allow pedestrians to cross without stepping in the water and waste that runs in the gutters, catch the first light and gleam faintly like teeth in a half-open mouth. Pompeii is a city of stone and water and noise, and even now, at this gentlest hour, it is beginning its daily argument with silence. And if you look carefully up and down the Via dell'Abbondanza, you can see the evidence of a city still remaking itself. Here, a building wears fresh plaster, brilliant white. There, scaffolding leans against a wall where masons will resume their work when the light is strong enough. 17 years ago, a great earthquake shook Pompeii to its foundations, cracked the temples, toppled columns, buckled the walls of homes and shops. Some wealthy families left and never came back, but others stayed. Others came, freedmen and merchants and craftspeople who saw in the broken city an opportunity to build something of their own. Pompeii in the summer of 79 is a city with dust on its hands and paint still drying on its walls. It is not a city in decline. It is a city in the middle of becoming. And in her Thermopolium on the Via dell'Abbondanza, Lucia stirs the lentils and waits for the sun to rise. A few streets away, in a rented room above a cloth merchant shop, a young man named Marcus is lying awake, staring at a ceiling he still does not recognize. He has been in Pompeii for 6 days. He came from a town to the north, a smaller place, quieter, where the loudest sound on any given morning was the braying of a neighbor's mule. Here, even before dawn, he can hear the city through the thin walls, voices, footsteps, the scrape of something heavy being dragged across stone. The room is small and sparsely furnished. A wooden bed frame with a straw mattress, a 3-legged stool, a hook on the wall where he hangs his one spare tunic. There is a window, though window is generous. It is a narrow opening in the wall, covered with a wooden shutter that lets in a blade of gray light and the sounds of the street below. Marcus is 19, and this is the farthest he has ever been from the place where he was born. He rises, splashes water on his face from a clay basin, and pulls on his working tunic, a rough, undyed garment that will end the day considerably less clean than it begins. He eats a piece of bread and a handful of olives he bought yesterday from a vendor near the Forum, and then he steps out into the street. Pompeii, even in the early morning, is an assault on the senses of someone who is not yet used to it. The streets are narrow. 2 carts could not pass each other on most of them. and they are lined on both sides with the open fronts of shops and workshops, their wooden shutters folded back to reveal the commerce within. There is a bakery with its mill visible through the doorway, a donkey walking its patient circle. There is a kaupona, a tavern, its counter still being wiped down from last night. There are election notices painted directly onto the walls in red and black letters. Vote for Gaius Cuspius Pansa for Edile. The paint bright and fresh, the names of candidates and their supporters competing for space on every available surface. Marcus cannot read all of the words, but the effect is unmistakable. This is a city that has opinions. The stepping stones force him to pay attention to where he puts his feet. They are spaced for an adult stride, and he has learned already that if he steps too quickly, he will misjudge and land ankle deep in the runoff that flows down the center of the street. Rainwater, wastewater, the residue of 10,000 daily lives draining slowly toward the low points of the city. The stones are worn concave in the centers from the passage of feet, and Marcus thinks not for the first time about all the people who have walked here before him. How many steps does it take to wear a hollow in a stone? He reaches the Fullonica, the fuller's workshop where he has been working since the day after he arrived, and pauses for a moment at the entrance. The Fullonica of Aulus is not the largest in the city, but it is respected. It occupies what was once the ground floor of a private home, converted after the earthquake into a working laundry. The small atrium that once held a decorative pool now holds the treading vats. 3 basins set into the floor, divided by low walls that come up to about waist height. Beyond them, in what was once a peristyle garden, drying racks stand in rows, and the back of the building opens onto a smaller street where the light and air can reach the hanging cloth. Marcus takes a breath. The smell of the Fullonica is something one must prepare for, and steps inside. The work of a fuller is ancient and unglamorous. Cloth comes in dirty or freshly woven, and it must be cleaned, softened, and finished before it can be worn or sold. The cleaning agent is urine, collected from public jars set at street corners around the city, a fact that Marcus tries not to think about too carefully, mixed with water in the treading vats. The fuller steps into the vat and treads the cloth with his bare feet, working it the way a baker works dough, agitating the fibers until the dirt and oil release. It is hard, rhythmic, physical work. Marcus's legs ached fiercely for the first 3 days. Now, on the 6th, the ache has settled into something more like awareness, his body learning a new language. Aulus is already at work when Marcus arrives, not in the vats but at the drying racks, inspecting a length of white wool that was bleached yesterday over burning sulfur. Aulus is a man in his 50s, freedman, former fuller's apprentice himself, who built this business with the money he saved in the years after his manumission. He is not a man who wastes words. He looks up when Marcus enters, nods once, not warmly, not coldly, simply an acknowledgement that Marcus exists and is on time, and returns to his inspection. This, Marcus is beginning to understand, is a form of approval. Aulus does not nod at people who disappoint him. He simply stops seeing them. The morning passes in the rhythm of the work: tread, rinse, wring, hang. The other workers, there are 4 besides Marcus, move through the process with the ease of long practice. Marcus watches them when he can, learning not just the motions, but the efficiency, the way an experienced fuller can feel through the soles of his feet whether the cloth is clean. He is not there yet, but he is closer than he was 6 days ago. When the sun is high enough that the heat becomes a presence in the room, Aulus calls a pause. The workers eat bread and cheese and drink water from a shared jug. Marcus steps outside into the street, blinking in the brightness, and he smells something. It is not the smell of the Fullenica. He has become half blind to that already. It is something else. Lentils, cumin, the warm, earthy smell of something slow-cooked and sustaining. He follows it without quite deciding to, around a corner, down a short stretch of the Via dell'Abbondanza, to the open front of a thermopolium where a woman with steady hands is ladling stew into a clay bowl for a man who appears to be a mason, still dusted with plaster. Lucia looks up as Marcus approaches. She sees what she always sees in a new face. Someone hungry, someone uncertain, someone trying to decide if this is a place where they are welcome. She does not know his name yet. She will. She sets a bowl on the counter. Marcus eats his first meal at Lucia's thermopolium standing up, as most customers do, leaning against the counter, watching the street. The lentils are good, better than good. They taste like someone cared about them. He finishes the bowl and considers his purse and his hunger and orders a second. Lucia refills it without comment, but there is something in the way she does it, a slight nod, a half-smile, that makes him feel, for just a moment, less like a stranger. He will come back tomorrow, and the day after that. In a house on a quieter street, behind a heavy wooden door that opens onto an entrance hall painted to resemble columns of red and yellow marble, a man named Quintus is preparing to work. The house belongs to a family called the Pompeii, or rather, it belongs to a man named Numerius Popidius Ampliatus, a freedman who has spent the years since the earthquake transforming himself from a former slave into one of the more prosperous citizens of Pompeii. The house reflects this transformation. It is not the largest on the street, but it is ambitious. The atrium has been freshly replastered. New mosaics line the floor of the tablinum, the formal reception room, and the dining room, the triclinium, where guests will recline on couches and eat and drink and conduct the real business of Roman social life. This is where Quintus comes in. He has been hired to paint the walls. Quintus is a pictor, a painter, and he has been one for most of his life. He was born into slavery, the property of a workshop owner in Naples who recognized early that the boy had a talent for color and line and put him to work mixing pigments at the age of 8. By 12, he was painting backgrounds. By 16, he was trusted with figures. At 23, his owner freed him, not out of generosity alone, but because a freed painter who owed his former master a percentage of his commissions was more profitable than a slave who had to be housed and fed. Quintus understood the arithmetic. He accepted his freedom with clear eyes and has spent the 20 years since building a reputation, commission by commission, wall by wall. This morning, he is working on the east wall of the triclinium. The design is a garden scene, one of the most popular subjects in Pompeii, where wealthy homeowners want their dining rooms to feel like outdoor pavilions surrounded by impossible greenery. There will be oleander and myrtle, songbirds perched on slender branches, a fountain at the center, the suggestion of open sky beyond. When it is finished, anyone dining in this room will feel as though the walls have dissolved and they are eating in a paradise garden shaded and cool with bird song in the air. But first, there is the plaster. Quintus's assistant, A young man named Philo, quiet and attentive, has been preparing the wall since yesterday. The process requires 3 layers: the rough base coat of lime and coarse sand, the smoother middle coat, and finally the intonaco, the fine surface layer made of lime and powdered marble dust that will receive the paint. Each layer must partially dry before the next is applied, and the timing is precise. Too dry, and the layers will not bond. Too wet, and the surface will sag and blur. This morning the intonaco is ready, smooth, white, and still damp. Quintus has perhaps 6 hours before it dries too much to accept the pigment, and in that time he must complete one section of the painting, one giornata, one day's work. The edges of the section have been carefully planned so that when tomorrow's fresh plaster is applied beside it, the seam will fall along a natural line in the composition, the edge of a branch, the curve of a fountain, and be invisible. He grinds his pigments on a flat stone. Each color is a small world of its own. The red ochre comes from iron-rich earth, and when ground fine it becomes a warm, russet tone that catches light the way a sunset does. The green earth, terra verde, is cooler, the color of shade under old trees. The Egyptian blue is the most precious, a manufactured pigment made by heating sand and copper and natron together, produced in workshops along the Nile and traded across the empire. When ground, it becomes a blue so deep and so vivid that it seems to carry its own light. And then there is carbon black, made from charcoal for the fine lines, the veins of a leaf, the eye of a bird, the thin shadow beneath a branch. He works standing, his pigments arranged on a low table beside him, a selection of brushes made from animal hair and reed. He begins with the background, the sky, the distant suggestion of trees, and works forward, layer by layer, toward the foreground. The brush moves with a confidence that comes from decades of practice, but also with a care that never quite becomes routine. Each stroke is final. Fresco does not allow for correction. What touches the wet plaster becomes part of the wall, and what is part of the wall will last, if the wall lasts, for centuries. He paints a bird, a small thing perched on a branch of myrtle, its head turned as if listening. He gives it a breast of warm ochre and wings tipped with green earth and an eye of pure carbon black, and for a moment, in the still air of the dining room, with the light falling through the doorway and the smell of lime and wet plaster all around him, the bird is alive. Quintus steps back and looks at it. He does not smile, exactly, but something in his posture eases just slightly, the way a held breath releases. The homeowner, Ampliatus, comes through once during the morning. He inspects the work from the doorway, asks a question about the shade of blue that will be used for the fountain, and leaves. The interaction is polite. Ampliatus is not unkind, but it carries the unmistakable weight of a man speaking to someone he has hired. Quintus answers clearly, deferentially, and returns to his work. It is a small moment, and it passes, but there is something in it, in the careful calibration of respect and distance, that sits in the room after Ampliatus leaves, like a scent that lingers. That evening, when the light is gone and the plaster is dried and the brushes have been cleaned, Quintus walks to the Via dell'Abbondanza and settles onto a stool at Lucia's Thermopolium. Lucia does not ask him what he wants. She sets a bowl of stew in front of him and a cup of wine mixed with water and a piece of bread, and she goes back to wiping down the counter, and for a few minutes neither of them speaks. This is not silence born of awkwardness. It is the silence of two people who have used up enough words over enough years that they no longer need to fill every moment with sound. Then Lucia says something about Petronia, something small, an observation about her mood lately, the way she stares out the window when she should be serving. And Quintus listens. He does not interrupt. He does not offer advice. He lets the thought land, and then, after a moment, he says something back. Not a solution, but a reflection, a way of seeing the same thing from a slightly different angle, and Lucia considers it and nods and refills his cup. This is what their friendship looks like. It looks like two people at the end of a long day, talking about the things that matter in voices that don't need to be loud. It looks like trust that has been built not in a single dramatic moment, but in hundreds of ordinary ones. Every evening at this counter, every honest word, every comfortable silence. They have known each other for nearly 5 years, long enough that Lucia cannot quite remember what the evenings felt like before he started coming. Long enough that Quintus, walking home afterward through the darkening streets, feels something he has rarely felt in his careful, self-contained life, the warmth of being expected somewhere. There is a woman named Serena who comes to the Thermopolium every morning, and she has come every morning for longer than Lucia has owned the place. She is old. How old exactly she does not say, and no one asks, because in Pompeii a woman of a certain age earns the right to her mysteries. Her hair is white and thin and pinned close to her head. Her hands shake slightly when she lifts her cup, but her eyes are sharp and her memory is sharper, and when she speaks, people listen. Not because she demands it, but because she remembers things that no one else in the neighborhood can. She remembers the earthquake, not the way a historian remembers it, as a date, a fact, a turning point in the city's fortunes. She remembers it the way a body remembers a fall. She was 35 years old when the ground shook on a February morning in the year 62, and she was standing in the Forum near the Temple of Jupiter, buying oil. She remembers the sound first, not the shaking itself, but the sound that came just before, a deep groan from somewhere underneath the world, as if the earth were drawing a breath it did not want to take. And then everything moved. She does not describe the destruction in detail. She does not need to. She describes instead what came after, the silence, the way the dust hung in the air for days, the way people walked through the streets looking at their own city as if they had never seen it before, because they hadn't, not like this, cracked open, its insides showing. Columns lay across the Forum like felled trees. The Temple of Jupiter lost its facade. Houses that had stood for generations were suddenly open to the sky. And then, slowly, the rebuilding. Serena tells this story the way she tells all her stories, in fragments over the course of many mornings, stirred into conversation the way spice is stirred into stew. She tells Lucia about the families who left. The old patrician households who looked at their cracked walls and broken mosaics and decided that Pompeii was finished, that the land itself was cursed, and loaded their belongings onto carts and went to Rome or to their country estates and did not come back. She speaks of them without bitterness, but with a kind of distance. They were people who could afford to leave, and so they left, and the city went on without them. Because others came, others stayed. The earthquake broke Pompeii open, and what rushed in was new life, new money, new ambition, new people. Freedmen like Ampliatus, like Aulus, like dozens of others, who saw in the rubble not ruin but opportunity. They bought damaged properties at low prices. They rebuilt. They opened businesses. They married, had children, ran for office, or at least supported those who did. The Pompeii that Serena lives in now is not the Pompeii she grew up in. It is louder, more various, less certain of its own hierarchies. She is not sure whether this is better or worse. She thinks, on most days, that it is simply different, and that different is the only direction time knows how to go. Petronia is working the counter when Serena tells one of these stories, a story about a garden that used to stand where a Phalonica now operates, a garden with a fig tree that produced the sweetest figs Serena had ever tasted. Petronia listens while she works, filling bowls, collecting coins, wiping the counter with a cloth, and Serena, watching her, sees something that Lucia perhaps cannot see because she is too close to it. She sees a girl who is listening not out of politeness, but out of genuine hunger, not for figs, but for the idea that this city, this street, this life has layers, that things were different once and will be different again, that the world is not fixed. Serena says to Lucia later when Petronia has gone upstairs, something quiet, something like, she has her father's eyes, but she has her own way of looking. Lucia smiles, but the smile is complicated and she changes the subject. There are things she is not ready to see or not ready to name. The morning light moves across the counter, warming the chips of colored marble. Serena finishes her cup, leaves a coin, and begins the slow walk home. Behind her, the Thermopolium fills with the midday crowd, and Lucia moves through it the way she always does, steady, capable, present. And if there is something turning over in her mind, something Serena's words have stirred, she keeps it well beneath the surface, where the day's work cannot reach it. Every 8 days, the market comes alive, the Nundinae, the market cycle that governs the rhythm of Roman commercial life, brings Pompeii to its fullest and loudest, and on this particular morning in mid-July, the heat is already gathering by the time the vendors begin setting up their stalls in the open area near the forum. The awnings go up first, stretched canvas and linen, casting patchwork shadows over the stone. Then the goods appear, baskets of figs and plums and hard green pears, amphorae of olive oil and wine and garum, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth, dried fish laid out in fans on wooden boards, bolts of undyed wool and linen, sandals and leather belts, clay lamps and bronze pins and small glass bottles of perfume that catch the light like jewels. Petronia moves through all of it. She has been sent to buy supplies, olive oil, dried herbs, a particular kind of hard cheese that Lucia uses in one of her dishes, and she has a list in her head and coins in a leather pouch at her belt, and she should not be taking this long. She knows this. She will hear about it when she gets back. But the market is a world, and she is 15, and the world is very large this morning. She stops at the oil vendors first because it is nearest, and because she is responsible enough to do the important things before she lets herself wander. The oil comes from an estate to the south, and the vendor pours it into the small amphora Petronia has brought, and the smell of it, green, faintly peppery, alive, is one of the smells that will always, for the rest of her life, mean home to her. But then she wanders. She passes a stall selling fabrics dyed in colors she has no names for, a blue like deep water, a red like the inside of a pomegranate, a yellow like late afternoon, She touches the edge of a piece of linen, and the vendor watches her without speaking, recognizing in her the look of someone who is touching, not because she intends to buy, but because she wants to know what the world feels like. She passes a man selling small bronze figurines, household gods mostly, Lares and Penates and tiny Venuses for bedroom shrines, and she picks one up and turns it in her hand and feels the weight of it, the smoothness, the craft. She passes the theater. It is closed this morning. There is no performance today, but the entrance is open, and she stops and looks in at the semicircle of stone seats rising in tiers, the stage still bearing the marks of the last production, and she imagines what it would be like to stand down there in the center and have every voice go quiet because you are about to speak. She does not want to be an actress. Women do not perform on the stage, and besides, that is not quite the shape of the wanting. It is something else, something about the idea of a space where people come to be moved, to feel things together, to have their ordinary lives interrupted by beauty. She does not have the words for this yet. She has the feeling. Near the edge of the market, she finds a stall she has not seen before, or perhaps she has seen it and never stopped. It is a pigment seller's stall, and the goods are arranged in small clay bowls, powdered ochre and reds and yellows, green earth, carbon black, and the thing that stops her, a bowl of blue so vivid it seems impossible. She stares at it. The vendor tells her it is Egyptian blue, that it comes from workshops near Alexandria, that it is ground from a glass-like substance made of sand and copper. She barely hears the explanation. She is looking at the color and thinking, without thinking it in words, that someone made this, that someone took sand and copper and fire and turned it into something that looks like the sky just after sunset, and that this is a kind of miracle that has nothing to do with the gods. She buys a small amount, just a pinch and a twist of cloth. She is not sure what she will do with it. She puts it in her pouch beside the coins, and it feels like a secret. On her way back through the market, moving faster now because the sun is higher and she is late, she passes a young man standing at a fruit vendor's stall, examining a plum with the careful attention of someone who is counting his money in his head before he spends it. She does not know him. He does not know her. But something makes her glance. Perhaps the way he is standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching everything with the alertness of someone for whom all of this is new. Their eyes meet for a moment. The moment passes. She walks on. Marcus buys the plum. By late July, Marcus's hands have changed. He does not notice it himself. It is Aulus who points it out in his way, which is to say that he does not point it out at all. What happens is this. A customer brings in a toga, a proper toga, heavy and white, the kind worn by a man of some standing, and Aulus, instead of handing it to one of the more experienced workers, hands it to Marcus. He says nothing. He simply holds it out, and Marcus takes it and understands. The work has entered his body. The treading, which once felt like nothing more than stomping, has become nuanced. He can feel through the soles of his feet the texture of the cloth, the places where dirt clings, the subtle difference between linen and wool beneath the water. His hands, when wringing and pressing, know how much force to use without being told. His forearms have thickened. The calluses on his palms have gone from raw to smooth. He is becoming a fuller, not because anyone has declared it, but because the work has been declaring it, quietly for weeks. The Follonica has its own rhythms, its own small society. There is Felix, who has worked here for 12 years and sings while he treads, not well, but persistently, folk songs from a region Marcus does not know. There is Titus, who is quiet and efficient and leaves the moment the day's work is done without lingering. There is old Appius, who supervises the drying racks and has opinions about the weather that he shares whether or not anyone has asked. These are not friendships exactly, not yet, but they are the daily familiarities that accumulate into something resembling kinship. Marcus knows how Felix takes his water. Titus knows that Marcus is always the first one at the vats in the morning. These small knowledges are the fabric of a shared life, and Marcus is being woven into it, thread by thread. The fuller's work follows the cloth from beginning to end. After the treading comes the rinsing, the cloth squeezed out by hand or through the wooden press, then beaten with a stick to loosen any remaining dirt, then rinsed in clean water piped in from the city system. Then the drying. Garments are spread on racks in the open garden at the back of the Follonica, and, as they dry, they are brushed gently with teasel, the spiny head of a plant, to raise the nap and soften the surface. White garments are placed on wicker frames over a pot of burning sulfur, the fumes bleaching them to a brightness that almost hurts the eyes. Colored garments are rubbed with creta Follonia, fuller's earth, a fine clay that restores color and removes lingering stains. The smell of sulfur and wet wool and the faint mineral tang of fuller's earth. These are the smells that Marcus carries with him now, in his hair and in his skin, and that the other patrons at Lucia's Thermopolium have learned to associate with his arrival, because he goes to Lucia's every day now. It is the fixed point of his afternoon. The bowl of lentils or chickpea stew, the cup of watered wine, the place at the counter where he stands and watches the street and feels more and more like someone who belongs to it. Lucia calls him by name. She asks about his work, not with great interest, but with the steady, low-level attention she gives to all her regulars, the attention that says, "I know you are here. I know you are a person with a life. I see you." It is not dramatic. It is not even, in any obvious way, warm, but it is consistent, and for Marcus, who is still building his world in this city brick by brick, consistency is a kind of warmth all on its own. One afternoon Lucia asks him where he comes from. He tells her the name of his town, the fact of his father's small farm, the decision to leave. He does not tell it as a story with a moral. He tells it simply, the way one states a fact. He came here because there was nothing to become where he was. Lucia nods. She understands this. Her husband came to Pompeii from somewhere else too, a long time ago, for reasons that were probably not so different. She gives him an extra piece of bread. She does not explain why. The Thermopolium closes when the light goes. In summer, this means Lucia has a long day. The sun does not set until the 9th or 10th hour, but it also means that the evenings, when they finally arrive, carry a particular sweetness. The city softens. The heat breaks, or at least relents. The streets empty of commerce and fill instead with the quieter traffic of people going home, going to the baths, going to visit a friend. On this evening in early August, Lucia has finished wiping down the counter and putting the lids on the dolia and sweeping the floor, and she is sitting on a stool behind the counter with a cup of wine when Quintus arrives. He does not always come this late. Sometimes he eats earlier when the counter is still busy and they exchange only a few words between customers. But tonight he is late because the work held him. A tricky section of the fresco, a border of intertwined garlands that required his steadiest hand, and he arrives to find the thermopolium empty except for Lucia and the lingering smell of the day's cooking and the first oil lamp flickering in the bracket on the wall. He sits. She pours him wine. For a moment the only sound is the distant murmur of the city and the faint pop of the oil lamp's flame. Then Quintus tells her something. He tells her that he has begun painting in his room. Not the room where he works, not a client's house, not a wall that someone else will own, but his own small rented room near the amphitheater where the light comes in through a high window in the mornings. He has taken a small piece of prepared plaster, a practice board, the kind apprentices use, and he has been painting on it in the early mornings before he goes to work. A scene, a small one. The view from the corner of the Via dell'Abbondanza at the hour when the light first touches the stepping stones and the street is empty, and the whole city seems to be holding its breath. He tells this to Lucia with a kind of hesitancy that does not suit a man who has painted hundreds of walls. It is not that he is embarrassed exactly, it is that this is different. Everything he has ever painted has been for someone else, designed to someone else's taste, placed in someone else's home, admired or ignored by someone else's guests. This small painting on a practice board is the first thing he has made that belongs only to him. It is the first time he has asked himself what he wants to see rather than what a client wants to see, and the answer, a quiet street in the early morning, empty of people, full of light, surprises him in a way he cannot quite explain. Lucia listens. She does not interrupt, and she does not make it into something larger than he has made it. She does not say you should sell it, or you should paint more, or you should have done this years ago. She says something simpler. She says she would like to see it when it is finished. And the way she says it, plainly without ceremony, is exactly right, because it treats the painting as real, not as a confession, not as a milestone, but as a thing that exists, that someone made, and that someone else would like to see. Quintus nods. Something in his shoulders releases. Then the conversation turns, the way conversations between old friends do, with a naturalness that leaves no seam. Lucia talks about Petronia. She talks about the way her daughter moves through the Thermopolium now. Competently, yes, but with the air of someone whose mind is elsewhere. She talks about finding a small twist of cloth in Petronia's room containing a pinch of blue pigment and not knowing what to make of it. She talks about the feeling of watching your child become a person you don't entirely recognize and how this is supposed to be a good thing. She knows it is a good thing, but it doesn't feel good, not yet. It feels like losing something you didn't know you could lose. Quintus is quiet for a while after she finishes. The lamp flickers. Somewhere outside someone laughs. Then he speaks, and what he says is this, that he has spent his entire working life painting paradise gardens for other people's walls, gardens full of birds and flowers and open sky, gardens that make small rooms feel infinite, and that the people who live with those paintings eventually stop seeing them. They become part of the wall. They become background. And this is not a failure of the painting. It is simply what happens when something beautiful becomes familiar. You stop seeing it because it is always there. He pauses, and then he says that he thinks this might be what is happening with Lucia and Petronia. Not that Lucia has stopped seeing her daughter, but that Petronia has been part of the wall for so long that Lucia has forgotten to look at her the way she would look at something new. And what Petronia is doing, this restlessness, this reaching, is the painting stepping off the wall, becoming something you have to look at fresh. Lucia does not respond immediately. She turns her cup in her hands. The wine catches the lamplight. When she speaks, it is not to argue or to agree. It is to say something she has not said aloud before, that she is afraid, not of Petronia leaving, not exactly, but of the Thermopolium without her, of the mornings without the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, of the quiet. She has built her life around this counter, and her daughter has been part of that life the way the dolia are part of the counter, essential, structural, load-bearing. If Petronia goes, will the counter hold? Quintus looks at her, and he says gently that the counter has held before, that it held when her husband died, and it held through the years she ran it alone, and it will hold again, not because Lucia is strong, although she is, but because the counter is not all she is, and she knows this. She has simply forgotten. They sit for a while longer. The lamp burns low. The city grows quieter. When Quintus finally rises to leave, Lucia walks with him to the doorway, and they stand for a moment looking out at the street, the stones pale in the moonlight, the shuttered fronts of the shops, the mountain a dark shape against the stars, and neither of them says anything, because there is nothing left to say, and because the silence between them is the most honest thing either of them has. He walks home through the empty streets. She climbs the stairs to her room above the Thermopolium, and if both of them feel, as they settle into the quiet of their own spaces, a little less alone than they did this morning, well, this is what friendship does. It does not solve anything. It simply makes the unsolved things bearable. August has settled over Pompeii like a hand pressed flat. The heat is a physical thing now, not just warm air, but a weight, a presence that leans on the city from the moment the sun clears the mountain until long after it sinks behind the ridge to the west. The stones of the streets hold the heat and release it slowly through the night, so that even at dawn the air is warm, and by midday the city moves at half speed, its citizens retreating into the shade of colonnades and courtyards, fanning themselves with whatever is at hand. The grape harvest is approaching. You can see the signs of it in the countryside beyond the city walls, where the vineyards that climb the lower slopes of the mountain are heavy with fruit, the vines drooping under the weight of clusters that have been darkening for weeks. The wine of Vesuvius is famous, or rather, it is common, which in the Roman world amounts to the same thing. It is everywhere. It is in every thermopolium, every tavern, every home. And the harvest that will produce next year's vintage is now just weeks away, and the farmers are watching the sky and the grapes with equal attention, waiting for the moment when the sugar is right and the picking can begin. In the city there is a festival. The Volcanalia falls on the 23rd of August, and it is observed with the seriousness that Romans bring to all matters involving the gods, which is to say, with a combination of genuine reverence and practical self-interest. Vulcan is the god of fire, of the forge, of the destructive flame that can consume a granary or a home in minutes. The festival exists to appease him, to ask that the fires of late summer, the accidental fires, the ones sparked by the dry heat and the wind, spare the city and its stores. Bonfires are lit, which has always seemed to Lucia a strange way to honor a god you are asking to withhold fire, but she is not a priest, and the gods have their own logic. Small offerings are thrown into the flames, fish, mostly live and wriggling, a sacrifice meant to substitute for human life. People hang their cloth and garments in the sun as if to show Vulcan that they have nothing to hide, that they offer their possessions openly to his gaze. There is food, of course. There is always food, and Lucia's Thermopolium does brisk business on festival days. The counter crowded from mid-morning onward, with people who have come from the ceremonies at the temples and are hungry and sociable and full of opinions about the state of the city. Marcus is here. He has never observed a Vulcanalia before. His hometown was too small for a proper one, and he watches the bonfire in the small square near the Thermopolium with the wide eyes of someone who is still collecting experiences, still filling the shelves of a life that is mostly empty rooms. The fire is large enough that he can feel its heat from 20 paces, and the light of it turns the faces of the crowd into something golden and strange. And for a moment the flames and the heat and the press of bodies around him, and the smell of smoke and cooking food and the sound of voices all blend into a single overwhelming sensation that he does not have a word for, but that might, if he thought about it, be called belonging. He is standing near the edge of the crowd, eating a piece of bread, when Petronia appears beside him. She is not looking at the fire. She is looking at the sky above the fire, where the sparks rise and become indistinguishable from the stars. And her face has that expression Marcus has begun to recognize from his afternoons at the Thermopolium, the expression of someone who is thinking about something far away. They do not speak much. She asks if he has seen a Vulcanalia before. He says no. She says they are always like this, the fire, the fish, the prayers. She says it with the easy authority of someone who has grown up with these rituals and has begun to see them from the outside the way you begin to see your own home from the outside when you start imagining leaving it. He asks what the fire is for. She tells him Vulcan, the god of fire, the petition for safety, and then she adds, almost as an afterthought, that her mother always says the best way to stay safe from fire is to keep a clean hearth and a bucket of water by the door, and that the gods help those who help themselves. Marcus laughs. It is the first time Petronia has made someone her own age laugh, and the sensation, the small power of it, the small connection, surprises her. They stand together for a while, watching the flames, and then Petronia goes back to the Thermopolium to help her mother, and Marcus stays, and the fire burns lower, and the crowd thins. Quintus is here too, though he stands apart, nearer the edge of the square, his back against a column. He watches the fire the way he watches everything, with the quiet, absorbing attention of a man who is always, on some level, composing an image. The light, the color of the flames against the dark, the way the shadows move on the faces around him. He is thinking about his painting, the small one, the private one, and whether he could capture firelight on plaster, and what pigments he would use, and whether it matters. Near him, Serena sits on a low wall, her shawl pulled around her shoulders despite the heat. She has been watching the fire too, but now she is looking at the mountain. Vesuvius stands against the sky the way it always stands, massive, familiar, dark. The vineyards climb its lower slopes. Its summit is lost in the night. She says something to the woman beside her, not Lucia, just a neighbor, someone she has known for years. She says that the wells have been odd lately, lower than they should be for this time of year, and the ground has trembled a few times in the past weeks. Nothing serious, nothing like the earthquake, just small shudders that you might not notice if you weren't paying attention. But Serena pays attention. She has lived long enough to know that the ground does not always say what it means. The neighbor shrugs. The ground trembles sometimes. It always has. It is nothing. Serena nods and pulls her shawl tighter and looks at the mountain one more time, and then she looks away, and the festival goes on, and the fire burns, and the prayers rise with the smoke into a sky full of stars. The morning is 3 days later, and Petronia is standing in the Thermopolium with a twist of blue pigment in her hand. She has been carrying it for weeks, this pinch of Egyptian blue she bought at the market, this small impossible color, and she has not known what to do with it. She has looked at it in her room, in the light, turning the cloth open and closed. She has touched it with her fingertip and stared at the blue dust on her skin. She has thought about it in the way that you think about a door that you have found but not yet opened, with curiosity and hesitation and a growing certainty that the hesitation is the thing that must go. This morning, before the Thermopolium opens, she tells her mother. She does not make a speech. She is not that kind of girl, and this is not that kind of moment. What she says is simpler and harder. She says that she has been thinking about what she wants, and that what she wants is to learn, not at the counter. She is grateful for the counter, she says, and she means it, and Lucia can hear that she means it. But somewhere else, she wants to learn a craft. She has been watching Quintus paint on the evenings when he describes his work to her mother. She has been looking at the frescoes on the walls of houses she passes, the way the colors become birds and gardens and skies. She wants to understand how that happens. She wants to be near it. She does not say she wants to be a painter. She does not yet know enough to say that. She says she wants to learn, and the word learn carries in it everything she cannot yet articulate. The blue pigment, the theater, the market, the feeling of the world being larger than the Thermopolium, the feeling of her own self being larger than she knew. Lucia's hands are still. She is holding a cloth she was using to wipe the counter, and her hands have stopped moving, and she is looking at her daughter. There is a long moment. What Lucia feels is complicated, and the story does not pretend otherwise. She feels the pull of refusal, the instinct to say, "Not yet, you're too young, who will help me here?" She feels the old fear that has been sitting in her chest since the first time she noticed Petronia staring out the window instead of at the customers. The fear that her daughter's life is a rope slipping through her fingers, and that if she does not grip tighter, she will lose it entirely. She feels beneath all of this a grief that has nothing to do with Petronia and everything to do with time, with the fact that the girl who used to fall asleep on a blanket behind the counter, curled up like a cat, is gone and has been gone for years and is not coming back. But she also feels, and this is the thing that Quintus's words, spoken on that evening weeks ago, have made room for, she also feels a recognition, because she was young once, and she wanted things, and someone, her husband, her mother, she cannot remember who, Let her want them. Lucia puts down the cloth. She reaches out and takes the twist of blue pigment from Petronia's hand and opens it and looks at it. This tiny amount of color, this impossible blue. And then she folds it back up and places it in Petronia's palm and closes her daughter's fingers around it. She says she will speak with Quintus. She says she does not know what is possible, but she will ask. She says that the Thermopolium will manage. She does not say, I am proud of you, or I am scared, or I am letting go. She says the Thermopolium will manage, and it is enough. And Petronia hears everything that is underneath it. There is another moment, the two of them standing in the Thermopolium in the early light, the counter between them, the dolia empty and waiting to be filled, the painted Mercury watching from the wall. And then Petronia moves around the counter and puts her arms around her mother, briefly, tightly, and steps back, and the day begins. That evening, Lucia tells Quintus. She tells him about the pigment, about the request, about the look on Petronia's face. She asks if he would be willing to teach the girl, not formally, not as a true apprenticeship, but enough. Enough to let her see if this is real, if the wanting has something solid underneath it. Quintus is quiet for a long time. He is thinking about what it means to show someone the thing you have spent your whole life learning, not as a service, not for payment, but because someone wants to see it the way you see it. He is thinking about the painting in his room, the one he has been making for no one but himself, and how it would feel to have someone look at it not as a product to be evaluated, but as a world to be entered. He says yes. Across the city, in the Phalanca, the day ends, as it always does, with the wringing of the last cloth, the emptying of the last vat, the slow loosening of tired muscles. Marcus hangs his apron on the hook by the door and steps out into the street, and Aulus says from behind him, without turning around, without making it into a thing, same time tomorrow. It is what Aulus says to everyone. It is what he has said to Marcus every evening for weeks. But tonight, for the first time, it does not sound like an instruction. It sounds like a statement of fact. Marcus will be here tomorrow. This is known. This is certain. He is part of the rhythm now. He walks to Lucia's Thermopolium for supper, and the streets are familiar, and the stepping stones meet his stride without thought, and the sounds of the city, the carts, the voices, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, are not noise any more. They are texture. They are the sound of a place that is slowly becoming his. August 23rd. The Volcanalia has come and gone. The bonfire has been swept away. The summer is beginning just barely to think about ending. The light shifts a few minutes earlier each evening, and the air, though still warm, carries occasionally a thread of something cooler, a rumor of autumn. Lucia closes the Thermopolium as the light fades. She moves through the familiar motions, the lids on the dolia, the counter wiped, the floor swept, the fire banked for the morning. She pauses at the little painting of Mercury on the wall and touches the edge of it lightly with her fingertips. She does not do this every night, but tonight she does. It is not a prayer exactly. It is more like a greeting or a good night, offered to someone who is both gone and always here. Upstairs, Petronia is sitting by the window of her small room, the twist of blue pigment open on the sill beside her. Quintus has begun teaching her just the basics, the foundations, how to grind pigment, how to prepare plaster, how to hold a brush. She is clumsy at it still, and impatient with her own clumsiness, but there are moments, brief, startling moments, when the brush does what she wants, when the color lands where she intended, and the feeling that runs through her in those moments is unlike anything she has felt before. It is the feeling of making something exist that did not exist a moment ago. She is beginning to understand that this is what she wants. Not fame, not escape, not rebellion. Just this, the power to make something where there was nothing. She looks out the window at the city. The rooftops are dark against a sky still holding the last amber light of sunset. The mountain is there, as it is always there, huge and patient. She thinks about tomorrow. Quintus has promised to show her how he mixes Egyptian blue with lime to make it hold on wet plaster. And the thought of tomorrow is a bright thing, a small flame. Across the city, Quintus is in his room. The painting is nearly finished. The view of the Via dell'Abbondanza in the early morning light, the stepping stones, the empty street. He has been working on it for weeks, in small increments, adding a detail here and there. Tonight he has added the last thing, a thin line of gold along the edge of the stones where the first light touches them. It is a small detail. No one would notice it unless they looked carefully. But he knows it is there, and it is true. He has seen that light on that street at that hour, and knowing that he has captured it, that it exists now outside of his memory, on a surface he can hold in his hands, fills him with a feeling he does not try to name. He sets the painting on the table by the window where the morning light will find it. He thinks about Lucia, about the conversation they had last night, about the way she laughed at something he said, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. And the thought is warm, the way a room is warm when someone has been in it recently. He thinks about Petronia and the look on her face when she made her first clean line of pigment on plaster, the surprise, the delight, the hunger for more. And he thinks that teaching her might be the most important work he has ever done, though he is not yet sure why. He lies down. The city is quiet. The sounds that reach him are small and far away. A dog, a door, the murmur of voices through a wall. He closes his eyes. In his room above the cloth merchant shop, Marcus lies on his bed and listens to Pompeii. The sounds have changed for him over the summer. They were once foreign and then familiar, and now they are simply his. The creak of a cartwheel, the distant laughter from a tavern, the sound of water running somewhere, always running, the city's small rivers of life flowing through their channels in the stone. He thinks about tomorrow, the work at the Folonica, the noon meal at Lucia's, the afternoon light on the drying racks, and the thoughts are comfortable, well worn, like a tunic that has been washed until it is soft. He thinks about the plum he bought at the market weeks ago on one of his first days, how carefully he had counted his coins, how new everything was. He cannot quite find that feeling anymore, the newness, the disorientation. It has been replaced by something else, something that does not have the sharp edges of novelty, but has a depth to it, a weight. He belongs here, not because anyone has told him so, but because the city has absorbed him, the way plaster absorbs pigment, and he is part of the wall now. He sleeps. In her room near the Thermopolia, Serena sits in the dark. She is old, and sleep comes less easily than it once did, and she is taken to sitting by her window in the late evenings, looking out at the street. The air is still tonight. The stars are very bright. The mountain is a black shape against them, and she watches it the way she watches all familiar things, with love and with the quiet knowledge that nothing familiar is permanent. She does not know what is coming. None of them do. They are living the way people live, in the middle of things, with plans half made and bread rising and paint drying and a girl holding a pinch of blue pigment like a promise. They are living in the ordinary, which is to say, they are living in the only place where life actually happens. The night deepens. The lamps go out one by one across the city. The streets grow still. Pompeii sleeps. And now let us step back. Let us step gently away from these lives, from Lucia and her counter, from Quintus and his quiet painting, from Marcus and his new belonging, from Petronia and her handful of blue, and let us rise slowly, the way a bird rises from a branch, until we can see the whole city below us, its streets and courtyards and gardens, its red-tiled rooftops, its fountains still running in the dark. We know what comes next. We have always known. But this is not a story about what comes next. This is a story about what was here. And what was here was bread, baking in domed ovens. What was here was paint on wet plaster, becoming birds. What was here was lentil stew in clay jars, warming on a counter made of mismatched marble, served by a woman who remembered what you liked. What was here was a young man learning the weight of cloth, and an old woman remembering the sound the earth made before it shook, and a girl discovering that the color blue could be made from sand and copper and fire. What was here was ordinary life, and because it was ordinary, and because the world works in ways that no one could have predicted, it was preserved. 2,000 years from now they will find the bread, still in the oven, still scored into 8 wedges, as round and as real as the morning it was made. They will find the jars, still set in the counter, still holding traces of the food that filled them. They will find the paintings, the gardens, the birds, the impossible blues, still vivid on the walls, still carrying the light that a painter gave them on a summer afternoon. They will find the election notices still shouting the names of candidates who never took office. They will find a mosaic of a dog by a doorway with the words Cave Canem, beware of the dog, and they will understand that someone in this city had a sense of humor and a dog and a home they were proud of. They will find the stepping stones worn smooth. They will look at the hollows in their centers and know, without being told, that thousands upon thousands of footsteps made them, and that each of those footsteps belonged to someone who had somewhere to go. This is what Pompeii gave us, not a disaster, not a tragedy. Those things happened, and they were real, and they matter. But what the city gave us in the end was something rarer, a single ordinary day, a summer of ordinary days, preserved so completely that we can still smell the bread, still see the colors, still feel the smoothness of the stones beneath our feet. And so tonight, as the story comes to rest, let us carry that with us. The thought that ordinary life, your ordinary life, with its familiar rooms and daily rhythms and the people you love, is the most precious thing there is, not because it lasts forever, but because, while it lasts, it is everything. The city sleeps, the street is quiet, the stones hold the last warmth of the day, and the mountain stands against the stars, and somewhere a dog settles into its bed by a door, and somewhere bread is rising, and somewhere a painting dries slowly on a wall, and the colors in it are so vivid that in 2,000 years they will still look like morning. Let the warmth of that thought stay with you now,